The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, buried beneath collection notices and automated reminders about overdue bills. Sarah Chen barely glanced at the subject line before her finger moved to delete it. Another scam. Another too good to be true offer designed to prey on people exactly like her. People with $3 in their checking account and rent due in 48 hours. But something made her pause. The sender's address didn't follow the usual pattern of misspelled banks or foreign princes. It came from a county clerk's office in rural Nevada, a place she had never been and had no reason to receive mail from. She opened it. The language was formal, bureaucratic, stripped of the urgency that characterized most messages demanding her attention. It referenced a property tax delinquency, a foreclosure auction, and a parcel of land identified only by coordinates and a case number. The auction, it stated, had concluded with no bidders. Under state law, the property would be offered for a nominal fee to any party willing to assume tax liability and maintenance obligations. The nominal fee was $1. Sarah read it 3 times, each pass failing to make it feel more real. She had never owned property, she had never owned anything that required more than a single box to transport. The idea that someone, anyone, would offer land for $1 suggested either a clerical error or a burden so profound that even for free, no one wanted it. She closed the laptop and returned to the stack of bills on the kitchen table, but the email lingered in her mind like an itch she couldn't reach. Her daughter Emma sat cross-legged on the apartment floor, coloring with markers that were nearly dry, their caps long since lost. She was 7 years old, small for her age, with dark hair that framed a face too serious for a child. She rarely asked for things anymore. Sarah had noticed that shift months earlier, the gradual retreat from requests that once came freely, new shoes, a toy, a birthday party. Emma had learned, as children in poverty do, that wanting was a luxury they couldn't afford. The apartment they lived in was technically a studio, though calling it that felt generous. 1 room, a corner kitchenette, a bathroom with a door that didn't close properly. The rent consumed most of Sarah's income from 2 part-time jobs, neither of which offered benefits or stability. What remained went toward food, utilities when they couldn't be delayed, and the mounting debt that had accumulated since Emma's father disappeared 3 years earlier. He had left without explanation, without forwarding address, without child support. Sarah had stopped looking for him after the first year. Some absences she had learned were permanent. She thought about the email again that evening after Emma had fallen asleep. The property, wherever it was, came with obligations she didn't understand. Tax liability sounded ominous. Maintenance suggested expense. Yet the alternative was this apartment, this existence measured in days rather than years. This constant calculation of which bill could be ignored longest without consequence. She opened her laptop again and searched the coordinates listed in the email. The property sat in a remote section of Nevada, miles from the nearest town, accessible only by dirt roads that barely registered on satellite imagery. The landscape surrounding it was barren, defined by rock and sparse vegetation, the kind of terrain that discouraged settlement and offered nothing obvious in return. She zoomed in as far as the map would allow, but the resolution dissolved into blurred pixels before revealing any useful detail. There was no structure visible, no indication of what the land contained or why someone had once paid taxes on it. The next morning, she called the number listed in the email. A woman answered after several rings, her voice flat with the practiced indifference of someone who fielded too many calls about things that didn't matter. Sarah explained who she was and why she was calling. The woman confirmed the details. The save one, $1, transfer of deed upon payment, immediate assumption of all liabilities. The property had been abandoned for over 2 decades. She said previous owner deceased. No heirs located, taxes unpaid long enough to trigger foreclosure. The county just wanted it off the books. Sarah asked what was on the land. The woman paused and Sarah heard the faint sound of papers being shuffled. According to the records, she said it was listed as a collapsed geode cave, nothing more. No structures, no utilities, no assessed value beyond the land itself. The cave had been a minor tourist attraction in the 70s, but a structural failure had closed it permanently. Since then, it had been left to decay. The woman's tone suggested she expected Sarah to hang up. Most people did, she added, when they learned what they were actually being offered. Sarah thanked her and ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, feeling the weight of impossibility press against her chest, a collapsed cave in the middle of nowhere. A piece of land that no one wanted offered to her because desperation made her the only person willing to consider it. It felt like a joke, except jokes didn't come with tax obligations. Her sister called that afternoon. Michelle lived 2 hours away in a suburb that felt like a different country, a place with lawns and garage sales and schools that didn't require metal detectors. She had married well, a phrase Sarah had heard enough times to understand its weight. Her husband worked in finance. They had 2 children, a house with a mortgage they could afford, and the kind of stability that allowed them to plan years in advance rather than days. Sarah told her about the email, keeping her voice neutral, aware that hope was a fragile thing easily crushed by dismissal. Michelle listened in silence until Sarah finished, then laughed, not cruel, but with the kind of certainty that came from a life insulated from bad decisions. "You're not seriously considering this," she said. "It's obviously a scam, and even if it's real, it's a collapsed cave in the desert. What are you going to do with that? You can't even afford rent here, and you're thinking about buying land in Nevada." Sarah tried to explain. "It's $1, she said. "Even I can afford $1. But Michelle's voice grew sharper. "It's not about the dollar," she said. "It's about what comes after. Taxes, maintenance, liability. You'll end up owing more than you started with, and you'll still be broke, but now with a worthless piece of desert attached to your name. Don't do this. You're desperate, and desperate people make terrible decisions." The call ended shortly after. Sarah sat in the apartment's single chair, the kind with springs that pressed uncomfortably through the thin cushion, and stared at the wall. She had learned long ago that her sister's life existed in a parallel reality, one where problems were theoretical rather than immediate, where mistakes were lessons rather than catastrophes. Michelle didn't understand because she had never needed to. Desperation wasn't a concept she'd encountered firsthand. That night, Sarah lay awake on the second-hand mattress she shared with Emma, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the building. Footsteps in the hallway, muffled voices through thin walls, the distant wail of sirens. She thought about the email, the coordinates, the collapsed cave sitting abandoned in a desert she had never seen. It was absurd. It was irrational. It was the kind of decision that Michelle would later point to as proof of Sarah's inability to think clearly. But it was also a door, a narrow one, barely visible, leading somewhere she couldn't see. And every other door she had tried had led to this apartment, to these bills, to this endless loop of survival without progress. The morning brought no new clarity, only the same calculations she performed every day. Rent was due in 36 hours. She had enough to cover it if she delayed the electric bill again and skipped groceries for the rest of the week. Emma would survive on school lunches, Sarah would survive on coffee and willpower. It wasn't a life, but it was movement, and movement was all she could manage. She opened the laptop and navigated to the county website. The payment portal was simple, almost anticlimactic. $1 plus a $5 processing fee. She entered her card information, the same card that was perpetually one payment away from being declined, and submitted the transaction. The confirmation email arrived within seconds, sterile and official, containing a case number and instructions for retrieving the deed. She had just bought land, a collapsed cave in the Nevada desert, for $6. The absurdity of it settled over her like a weight, and for a moment she considered calling the county back, cancelling the transaction, returning to the safety of known failure. But the moment passed. The deed would arrive by mail in 7 to 10 business days, the email said. Until then, she had rent to pay and a daughter to feed, and no time to consider whether she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or the first smart decision in years. Emma noticed the change immediately, the way children do when something shifts in the emotional atmosphere of their small world. She asked if everything was okay while they ate dinner. A meal composed of pasta and canned sauce stretched to cover 2 days. Sarah smiled and said, "Yes, everything was fine. It wasn't a lie." Exactly. It was the kind of truth that lived in the space between what was real and what needed to be believed. The deed arrived on a Monday, folded into a large envelope marked with official seals and warnings about tampering. Sarah opened it carefully, as though the paper itself might crumble under too much pressure. The language was dense, filled with legal terms she only half understood, but the essential facts were clear. She now owned 4.7 acres in Mineral County, Nevada. The property included one collapsed geode cave, no structures, no utilities, and approximately $11,000 in delinquent taxes that she was now legally obligated to address. The number hit her like cold water. $11,000, more than she earned in 6 months, more than she had ever had in her life at one time. The email had mentioned tax liability, but she had imagined hundreds, not thousands. The room tilted slightly, and she sat down before the floor could decide to meet her halfway. Michelle called that evening as though she possessed some instinct for bad timing. Sarah told her about the taxes. The silence that followed was long enough to feel deliberate. "I told you," Michelle said finally. "I told you this was a terrible idea. Now you own land you can't afford and owe money you'll never be able to pay. What are you gonna do?" Sarah didn't have an answer. She told Michelle she needed to go and ended the call before her sister could say anything else that was both true and unbearable. She spent the rest of the evening searching online for information about property tax relief, hardship exemptions, payment plans. The results were discouraging. Nevada offered few protections for delinquent owners, and the bureaucratic language suggested a system designed to extract payment rather than accommodate hardship. She found herself returning to the coordinates, staring at the blurred satellite image that revealed nothing. The property sat there, silent and distant, a problem she had purchased for $6. The collapsed cave, according to the few search results she could find, had been part of a brief mining boom in the region. Geodes had been harvested commercially until the cave's structural integrity failed in the late 7s. After that, it had been sealed and abandoned, deemed too dangerous for salvage and too remote for redevelopment. Her co-worker at the diner where she worked mornings mentioned a friend who bought foreclosed land once. It turned into a nightmare. The co-worker said taxes, liens, environmental violations he didn't even know existed. He ended up walking away, and it destroyed his credit for years. "You should sell it," she added. "Cut your losses before it gets worse." Sarah nodded, but she knew selling wasn't an option. Who would buy a collapsed cave with $11,000 in delinquent taxes attached? The property wasn't an asset, it was a burden, and now it was hers. The week passed in a haze of work and worry. She picked up an extra shift at the grocery store where she worked evenings stocking shelves until her back ached and her thoughts blurred into static. Emma grew quieter, retreating into drawings and books borrowed from the school library. Sarah wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but children knew when adults were lying, and Emma was too smart to be comforted by words that didn't match reality. On Friday, a letter arrived from the county tax assessor's office. It outlined the payment schedule for delinquent taxes, including interest and penalties that had accumulated over 2 decades. The total had grown to $13,000, with late fees continuing to accrue monthly. The letter was polite but firm. Payment was expected within 90 days, or the property would be subject to additional foreclosure proceedings, which seemed absurd. Sarah thought they had just given her the property. Now they wanted to take it back. She called the assessor's office, navigating an automated system that eventually connected her to a woman who sounded tired before Sarah even spoke. She explained her situation, the $1 purchase, the surprise of the tax burden, the impossibility of payment. The woman listened without interruption, then delivered the same message as the letter. The taxes were valid. The timeline was firm. Extensions required documentation of financial hardship and approval from a review board that met quarterly. Sarah asked what happened if she couldn't pay. The woman's voice softened slightly. The property would be foreclosed again. She said you'd lose it and the taxes would be written off. It's not ideal, but it happens. A lot of people buy these delinquent properties thinking they're getting a deal, then realize the debt attached is too much to carry. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. The call ended, and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the deed. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as though it had absorbed the weight of her mistake. She had bought land sight unseen, driven by desperation and the hope that something, anything, might change if she just took one risk. Now she owned a collapsed cave she couldn't visit, couldn't sell, and couldn't afford to keep. Emma asked that night why she looked sad. Sarah pulled her close, feeling the small warmth of her daughter's body against her own, and lied again. She said she was just tired. Emma accepted it the way she accepted everything, with a quiet resignation that broke Sarah's heart more than any tantrum ever could. Later, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah opened her laptop and searched for images of geode caves. She wanted to see what she had bought, even if only in pictures taken decades earlier. The results were sparse. A few black and white photographs from the 70s showed tourists standing near the cave entrance, smiling for cameras that no longer existed. The geodes inside were massive, their hollow centers lined with crystals that caught the light. In one image, a child stood inside a geode large enough to hold 3 people, their arms spread wide in amazement. The cave had been beautiful once, Sarah realized. Before the collapse, before the abandonment, it had been something worth seeing. Now it was buried under rock and time, sealed off from the world, forgotten by everyone except the county that wanted its taxes paid. She closed the laptop and lay down beside Emma, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The property felt less like an asset and more like a metaphor. A beautiful thing destroyed and hidden, worth nothing to anyone, just like her. The weekend passed and Monday arrived with the same relentless indifference as always. Sarah went to work, served coffee and eggs to people who didn't notice her, and returned to the apartment exhausted. Bills accumulated. Emma needed new shoes. The car made a sound that suggested expense she couldn't address. Life continued with the same grinding persistence, and the deed sat in a drawer, gathering dust and resentments. But the image of the Geode cave stayed with her. The photographs, grainy and faded, had shown something extraordinary, hidden beneath ordinary rock. Crystals formed over millions of years, shaped by pressure and time, concealed until someone decided to look. She thought about the collapsed entrance, the sealed chambers, the dark spaces that no one had entered in decades. She thought about the $11,000 in taxes, a number so large it felt abstract, like a concept rather than a debt. And she thought about the fact that no one had wanted it, not for 20 years. Not until desperation made her the only person willing to say yes. That night, she made a decision. It was not a good decision by any rational measure. It was not a decision Michelle would approve of or that any financial advisor would recommend, but it was a decision shaped by the understanding that doing nothing was also a choice. And that choice led only to more of the same. She would go to Nevada, she would see the property with her own eyes. She would understand what she had bought before deciding whether to fight for it or let it go. It was impractical, expensive in ways she couldn't afford, and possibly the continuation of a mistake she had already made. But it was also the only way forward she could see. The cave had been hidden for decades. Whatever was down there, collapsed or not, belonged to her now. And Sarah Chen had spent too many years owning nothing to give up the first thing that ever had her name on it. Even if that thing was a hole in the ground in a desert she had never seen. The decision made, she began to calculate what it would cost. Gas, 2 days off work, food for the drive. The numbers added up quickly, each one a small impossibility that would have to be overcome. But she had already spent $6 on a cave. What was a few hundred more to see what that $6 had bought? She fell asleep that night with the faint stirring of something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope exactly, but something close. A sense that the future might contain a variable she hadn't accounted for. A possibility that the door she had opened, narrow and uncertain as it was, might lead somewhere other than another dead end. The next morning, she told Emma they were going on a trip. Emma looked up from her cereal, eyes wide with surprise. "Where?" she asked. "Nevada," Sarah said. "To see our land." Emma's expression shifted from surprise to confusion. "We have land." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed in weeks. "We do," she said, "and we're going to see what it looks like." Emma asked if they would camp there, if there were animals, if it was like the pictures in her library books. Sarah answered each question carefully, promising nothing she couldn't deliver, but allowing the excitement to build between them. It felt dangerous, this hope, but it also felt necessary, and necessity, Sarah had learned, was the only compass she had left. The drive to Nevada took longer than Sarah had anticipated. She left early on a Saturday morning, Emma asleep in the passenger seat. The car loaded with everything they might need for a trip into terrain she didn't understand. Water, flashlights, basic tools, a first aid kit she hoped they wouldn't need. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, cutting through landscape that shifted from green to brown to something that defied easy description. Not quite desert, not quite mountain, just vast empty space that swallowed distance without offering anything in return. Michelle had called the night before, one last attempt to talk Sarah out of going. "It's dangerous," she said. "You don't know what's out there. You're taking Emma into the middle of nowhere based on some fantasy that there's something valuable hidden in a collapsed cave. There isn't, there's nothing, just rocks and debt and wasted time." Sarah had listened, thanked her for caring, and ended the call. Michelle meant well, but meaning well, didn't pay rent or buy shoes or offer any alternative beyond giving up. Emma woke as they crossed into Nevada, pressing her face against the window and asking questions Sarah couldn't answer. Why is it so empty? Where are all the people? Are we almost there? Sarah told her they were getting close, though close was relative when measured against coordinates on a map that didn't show roads. The GPS lost signal twice, forcing Sarah to rely on printed directions she had prepared in advance. Each turn onto a smaller road felt like a step further from civilization, from safety, from the possibility of retreat. The town nearest to the property appeared suddenly, a scattering of buildings that barely qualified as a settlement, a gas station, a diner, a motel with vacancy sign permanently lit. Sarah stopped for gas and bought sandwiches from a convenience store that smelled of old coffee and dust. The man behind the counter was older, his face weathered by sun and time. He glanced at the coordinates Sarah showed him and nodded slowly. "You're heading toward the old Geode site," he said. "No one goes out there anymore. Road's rough." "Cave's been closed since before I moved here." Sarah asked if he knew anything about it. He shrugged. "Tourist trap. Back in the day, people used to come from all over to see the crystals. Then it collapsed. A couple of people got hurt, I think. Maybe died, I don't remember. After that, they sealed it up and everyone moved on. County took it over when the owner stopped paying taxes. Been sitting empty ever since." He looked at Emma, then back at Sarah. "You planning to go inside?" Sarah shook her head. "Just want to see the property, we own it now." The man's expression shifted to something between surprise and pity. "You bought it?" Sarah nodded. He was quiet for a moment, then wished her luck. "You'll need it," he added. The final stretch of road was less a road and more a suggestion. Dirt and rock barely wide enough for one vehicle, winding through terrain that seemed designed to discourage visitors. The car rattled over uneven ground, and Sarah drove slowly, aware that a breakdown out here would mean hours of walking before they reached help. Emma had gone quiet again, sensing perhaps that they had moved beyond the edges of the familiar world into something stranger. The property revealed itself gradually. First, the fencing rusted and collapsed in places, marking boundaries that no one had bothered to maintain. Then, the sign half buried in sand, its letters faded but still legible. Geode Caverns closed permanently. Beyond it, the land opened into a flat expanse dotted with scrub brush and rock formations that looked like monuments to emptiness. Sarah parked the car and stepped out into air that was hotter than she expected, dry enough to pull moisture from her skin immediately. Emma climbed out slowly, staying close to Sarah, her eyes scanning the landscape with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Sarah looked around, trying to match what she saw with what she had imagined. There was no structure visible, no indication of the cave beyond a depression in the ground about 50 yards away. Rocks had been piled around it, deliberately arranged to block access. Yellow caution tape, brittle and faded, still clung to metal stakes driven into the earth decades earlier. They approached carefully. The ground was uneven, dotted with holes and crevices that suggested instability beneath the surface. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly, aware that one misstep could mean injury far from any hospital. As they neared the collapsed entrance, the scale of it became clear. The depression was larger than it appeared from a distance, perhaps 20 feet across, descending at an angle into darkness that the afternoon sun couldn't penetrate. The rocks blocking the entrance had shifted over time, creating gaps large enough to see through. Sarah knelt at the edge, peering into the shadows below. The air rising from the opening was cooler, carrying a faint mineral scent. She could see the outline of what had once been a pathway, now buried under rubble. Beyond that, nothing. Just darkness and the suggestion of space that extended deeper than visible light could reach. Emma tugged at her hand. "Is this it? Is this our cave?" Sarah nodded. "This is it." Emma looked disappointed. "It doesn't look like anything." Sarah couldn't disagree. From the surface, it was just a hole in the ground, surrounded by desert and marked by warnings no one heeded anymore, because no one came here. Yet something about it held her attention. The way the rocks had been piled suggested intention, as though the collapse had been contained rather than merely left to settle naturally. She stood and surveyed the area more completely. The fence line extended in all directions, encompassing more land than she had visualized. To the east, a cluster of rock formations rose like broken teeth. To the west, the ground sloped gently toward what might have been a dry riverbed. North and south, nothing but open space. It was desolate, it was isolated, and it was hers. They spent an hour walking the property, Emma collecting interesting rocks while Sarah tried to imagine what someone might do with land like this. Selling it remained impossible without clearing the taxes. Developing it required resources she didn't have. The cave itself was inaccessible, sealed by decades of neglect and safety concerns. Standing there, surrounded by emptiness, Sarah felt the weight of her mistake settle more firmly. Michelle had been right. This was a fantasy, a desperate gamble that had cost money she couldn't afford to lose and delivered nothing in return except proof of her own poor judgments. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Sarah decided they should head back. The motel in town would have to do for the night. Tomorrow she would take pictures, document the property for her own records, and then drive home. The cave would remain sealed. The taxes would remain unpaid, and eventually the county would take it back, writing off another failed attempt by someone who didn't understand what they were getting into. But as they walked toward the car, Emma pointed at something Sarah had missed. Along the western edge of the property, partially hidden behind an outcropping of rock, was a structure, small, built low to the ground, its walls constructed from the same stone as the surrounding terrain. Sarah changed direction, curious now. As they approached, the building's purpose became clearer. It was a shelter, or had been once. The roof had partially collapsed, but the walls remained standing. A faded sign near the entrance read, "Site Office." Sarah pushed open the door, which resisted before giving way with a groan of rusted hinges. Inside, the space was dim and dusty, filled with debris and the remnants of abandonment. A metal desk sat against one wall, its surface covered in old papers that crumbled at a touch. Filing cabinets lined another wall, their drawers hanging open, most of them empty. In the corner, a chair lay overturned, its fabric torn and stained by time and weather. She moved carefully, mindful of the unstable floor and the possibility of wildlife that might have claimed the space. Emma stayed near the door, reluctant to enter. Sarah didn't blame her. The building felt less like shelter and more like a tomb. Still, she searched through what remained, looking for anything that might explain the property's history or offer insight into what lay beneath the collapsed cave. Most of the papers were beyond recovery, their ink faded, their edges dissolved by moisture and decay. But in the bottom drawer of the desk, protected by a sealed plastic folder, she found something intact. A set of maps hand-drawn and annotated in careful script. They showed the cave system in cross-section, revealing chambers and passages that extended far deeper than she had imagined. Labels marked specific formations: cathedral room, crystal gallery, deep shaft. Someone had measured these spaces, documented them, preserved them with the care of someone who valued what lay beneath. One map caught her attention. It showed the main chamber, the one tourists had visited, with a notation along one wall, primary vein, commercial grade specimens. An arrow pointed deeper toward a section of the cave labeled unexplored, sealed, pending evaluation. Sarah stared at the notation, her mind working through the implications. The cave hadn't been fully explored when it collapsed. There were chambers that had never been opened, sections that remained sealed by design rather than accidents. She folded the maps carefully and placed them in a jacket pocket. Emma called from the doorway, asking if they could go. Sarah agreed, taking one last look around the office before stepping back into the fading sunlight. The shelter offered nothing else, but the maps felt significant in a way she couldn't yet articulate. They were evidence that someone had believed this place was worth documenting, worth preserving. That belief, however old and forgotten, felt like a fragile thread connecting past to present. They drove back to town as the sky darkened, and Sarah checked them into the motel. The room was small and worn, but clean enough. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the day. Sarah sat at the small table, the map spread before her, tracing the lines with her finger. The cave system was extensive. The collapse had sealed the tourist entrance, but the map suggested other access points, smaller openings that led to different sections of the formation. She thought about the notation unexplored, sealed, pending evaluation. Why seal something pending evaluation? What had they found that required such caution? The commercial grade specimens mentioned suggested value, but geodes, as far as she understood, were not particularly rare or expensive, unless these were different, somehow larger, clearer, more unusual in their formation. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind cycled through possibilities and doubts, alternating between hope and resignation. The maps didn't change the reality of her situation. She still owed $13,000 she didn't have. The cave was still collapsed. The property was still worthless by any practical measure. Yet something about the maps bothered her. Not the information they contained, but the care with which they had been created. Someone had spent time down there measuring, documenting, thinking about what came next. And then they had stopped or been stopped. Morning arrived too quickly. Sarah woke to find Emma already awake, drawing on the back of the motel's complimentary notepad. They ate breakfast at the diner where the waitress recognized them from the day before. "You go out to the Geode site?" she asked. Sarah nodded. The waitress refilled her coffee without being asked. "My dad used to work there," she said before the collapse. "He said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Miles of crystals, bigger than anything anyone expected. Made him sad when it closed. Felt like something important got lost." Sarah asked what caused the collapse. The waitress shrugged. Official story was structural failure. Cave wasn't stable enough for the number of visitors it was getting. But my dad always thought there was more to it. They were getting ready to expand the Toru, he said, going deeper into the formation. Then suddenly everything shut down. Collapse happened. People evacuated and they sealed it before anyone could really assess the damage. He always wondered if they found something they didn't want people to see. The conversation stayed with Sarah as they drove back to the property. The sun was higher now, revealing details that had been obscured by shadows the day before. She parked in the same spot and told Emma to stay near the car while she examined the area more carefully. The maps showed multiple access points, but only one had been used for the tourist entrance. The others were marked as ventilation shafts or emergency exits, narrow openings that would be difficult to navigate but theoretically possible. She began to search along the fence line looking for depressions or irregularities that might indicate hidden openings. The ground was treacherous, and she moved slowly, testing each step before committing her weight. About 100 yards from the main collapse, she found what she was looking for. A cluster of rocks arranged in a way that looked natural but wasn't. They formed a rough circle concealing a gap that led downward at a steep angle. Sarah knelt and examined the opening. It was narrow, perhaps 2 feet across, descending into darkness that suggested depth. Cool air rose from below, carrying the same mineral scent she had noticed at the main entrance. She aimed her flashlight into the gap, watching the beam disappear into space that extended beyond her sight. This was one of the ventilation shafts shown on the maps. It was narrow enough that most adults wouldn't fit, but Sarah was small and Emma was smaller. She returned to the car and retrieved a rope from the trunk along with a larger flashlight and the first aid kit. Emma watched her with concern. "Are you going down there?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I need to see what's below." Emma's eyes widened. "What if you get stuck? What if it collapses?" Sarah knelt and took her daughter's hands. "I'm going to be very careful, and if anything feels wrong, I'll come right back up, I promise." She secured one end of the rope to the car's frame, testing its strength. The opening was steep, but navigable if she took her time. She told Emma to stay by the car and watch the rope. "If it goes slack or if I don't come back up in an hour," she said, "you drive back to town and get help." Emma looked terrified. "I don't know how to drive." Sarah placed her hand on her daughter's cheek. "You do know. You've watched me 100 times, and you're smart enough to figure it out if you have to. This is important, Emma. Can you do it?" Emma nodded, though tears filled her eyes. Sarah pulled her close, then turned toward the opening. She descended slowly, feet finding purchase on rough stone, hands gripping the rope. The shaft was narrower than it appeared from above, forcing her to angle her body to fit. After 10 feet, the passage widened slightly and she found herself in a small chamber carved from solid rock. Her flashlight revealed walls covered in crystalline formations, small but intact, their surfaces catching the light. She moved deeper, following the shaft as it angled downward. The temperature dropped further, and the air grew still, heavy, with the weight of earth pressing in from all sides. After another 20 feet, the shaft opened into a larger space, and she emerged into what the maps had called the Crystal Gallery. The beam of her flashlight swept across a chamber that stole her breath. The walls were lined with geodes, massive formations that extended from floor to ceiling. Some were intact, their exteriors rough and unremarkable. Others had split open, revealing interiors filled with crystals that glittered like captured starlight. The largest was easily 6 feet tall, its hollow center lined with purple amethyst, so clear it seemed to glow in the light. Sarah stood frozen, unable to fully process what she was seeing. The collapse had sealed the tourist entrance, but it had not damaged this section of the cave. The formations here were pristine, untouched by decades of abandonment. She moved carefully through the chamber, aware that any misstep could disturb the delicate balance that had preserved this place. The crystals were extraordinary, far larger and more perfect than anything she had seen in photographs. If these were valuable, if even a fraction of what she was seeing held commercial worth, then the property wasn't worthless. It was extraordinary. She found the passage marked on the maps as leading to the unexplored section. A metal gate blocked the way, secured with a chain and lock that had rusted but held firm. Beyond it, her flashlight revealed another chamber. This one darker, its features obscured by distance. She tried the lock, knowing it was futile. The chain held. Whatever lay beyond would have to wait. Sarah stood in the gallery for several more minutes, trying to commit every detail to memory. The scale, the clarity, the sheer presence of these formations suggested something far more significant than a minor tourist attraction. This was a natural wonder, hidden beneath the desert, forgotten by everyone except the county that wanted its taxes paid, and now it belonged to her. She climbed back through the shaft carefully, emerging into sunlight that felt blinding after the darkness below. Emma rushed over, relief flooding her face. "You were down there for so long." Sarah pulled her close. "I know. I'm sorry, but Emma, you won't believe what's down there." She tried to describe it, but words failed. The geodess had to be seen to be understood. Emma listened, her fear gradually replaced by excitement. "Can we go back down? Can I see it?" Sarah hesitated. The shaft was dangerous. The footing uncertain, but Emma's eyes held the same light. Sarah felt the dawning realization that they had stumbled into something extraordinary. "Not yet," Sarah said. "First, we need to figure out what this means, what it's worth, and how to keep it." Emma asked what she meant. Sarah looked back at the opening in the ground, then at the vast empty land surrounding it. "Someone tried to hide this," she said. "They sealed it and walked away." I need to understand why before we go any further. They drove back to town, Sarah's mind racing with possibilities and questions. She needed information, expertise, someone who understood geological formations and their value, but she also needed discretion. If word spread about what lay beneath her property, she would lose control of it before she understood what she had. The diner waitress had mentioned her father worked at the site. Sarah wondered if he might still be alive, might remember details that records didn't capture. She asked, at the motel desk, describing the man as someone who had worked at the Geode caverns before the collapse. The Claire, an older woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "That would be Tom Harrison. Lives about 5 miles west of here. If you're asking about the cave, he'll talk your ear off. Hasn't stopped thinking about that place since they shut it down." Sarah drove out to find him that afternoon, following directions that led to a small house sitting alone against the desert horizon. Tom Harrison answered the door slowly, his body bent by age, but his eyes still clear. Sarah introduced herself, explained that she owned the property now, and asked if he would be willing to share what he remembered. Tom studied her for a long moment, then nodded and invited her inside. His living room was filled with photographs, maps, and specimens from the cave. Crystals of every size lined shelves and tables, each labeled with dates and locations. Tom sat down heavily and gestured for Sarah to do the same. Emma stood near the door, eyes wide at the display. Tom noticed her interest. "You like rocks?" Emma nodded. Tom smiled. "Then you're gonna love what your mom just bought." He spent the next hour telling Sarah what he remembered. The cave had been discovered in the 60s, a natural formation created over millions of years. The geodests there were exceptional, larger and clearer than most commercial sites. The tourist operation had been profitable but modest. Then in the mid-70s, they began expanding the tour route. That's when they found the deep chambers. Tom leaned forward, his voice dropping though no one else was there. "We went down into sections that had never been touched. And what we found, I've never seen anything like it. Geodes the size of cars. Crystals so perfect they looked artificial. But that's not what made them valuable. It was what was inside some of them." Sarah asked what he meant. Tom stood and retrieved a small box from a shelf. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a crystal unlike any Sarah had seen. It was clear as glass, but shot through with threads of gold that seemed to move when the light hit them. Tom held it up. "Native gold," he said, trapped inside the crystal as it formed. Rare doesn't even begin to describe it. "We found 3 chambers full of formations like this." The company knew immediately what it meant. They were sitting on a fortune. He rewrapped the crystal and set it aside. Then the collapse happened. Convenient timing, some of us thought. The company brought in engineers who declared the structure too dangerous to stabilize. They sealed it, filed for bankruptcy, and walked away. Those of us who worked there always suspected the collapse was staged, that they wanted an excuse to shut down the tourist operation without drawing attention to what they'd really found. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. If that was true, if the chambers below contained formations like the one Tom showed her, then the property was worth far more than $13,000 in taxes. It was worth millions, tens of millions, maybe more. But she also understood the danger. If someone had deliberately collapsed the cave to hide its value, they wouldn't appreciate her reopening it. Tom seemed to read her thoughts. "Be careful," he said. "People have been watching that property for years, waiting for someone to either develop it or give it up. You show up asking questions. Start exploring, word will get out. And when it does, you'll have attention you don't want." Sarah thanked him and stood to leave. Tom walked her to the door. "One more thing," he said. The maps we made were copied before the company destroyed the originals. I kept one set. If you're serious about going down there, you'll need them. They show the safe routes, the places where the structure is solid. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a folder. Inside were detailed maps, far more comprehensive than the ones Sarah had found in the site office. Tom handed them to her. "Don't make my mistake," he said. I walked away when they shut it down. Didn't fight, didn't question, regretted it ever since. If you've got a chance to bring that place back to show people what's really down there, take it and don't let anyone stop you. Sarah drove back to the motel with Emma, her mind reeling from what Tom had told her. The cave wasn't just valuable, it was extraordinary. And if his suspicions were correct, it had been deliberately hidden to prevent that value from being realized. She spread the new maps on the motel room table and studied them late into the night. The chambers Tom described were marked clearly. The safe routes he mentioned were highlighted. And at the bottom of the deepest chamber, a notation in Tom's handwriting read, "Cathedral Room, Primary Discovery, Est Value $500M+. Sarah stared at the number, trying to make it feel real. $500 million buried beneath a desert, hidden for decades, and now legally hers. The taxes she owed suddenly seemed insignificant. The poverty that had defined her life suddenly seemed like a problem that could be solved. But between this moment and that solution lay obstacles she couldn't yet see, dangers she hadn't yet encountered, and choices that would determine whether she walked away wealthy or ended up as forgotten as the cave itself. She looked at Emma, asleep on the motel bed, unaware that their lives had just shifted in ways neither of them could fully understand. Tomorrow they would go home. Sarah would return to work, to bills, to the grinding routine that filled their days. But she would also begin planning. The cave had waited decades for someone to return. It could wait a little longer. And when Sarah came back, she would come prepared, not as a desperate woman gambling on hope, but as the owner of something extraordinary, ready to claim what was hers. The first part of the journey had ended. The discovery had been made, but the real work was just beginning. And Sarah Chen, who had spent years surviving on nothing, was about to learn whether she had the strength to fight for everything. The drive back felt longer than the journey out. Sarah kept replaying Tom's words. The way he had held that crystal with gold threads running through it. The certainty in his voice when he said the collapse had been staged. Emma slept most of the way, exhausted by 2 days that had compressed more experience than she usually encountered in months. Sarah drove through the night, unwilling to spend money on another motel room when she could push through and arrive home by morning. The apartment greeted them with its familiar shade-bess. The bills still waited on the kitchen table, the same stack she had left behind, indifferent to her absence. Sarah set the maps on the counter and stood looking at them, feeling the disconnect between what she now knew and what her life still required. She couldn't pay rent with geological maps. She couldn't feed Emma with the promise of crystals buried beneath Nevada deserts. The extraordinary discovery didn't change the fact that she still had $3 in a checking account and work in 4 hours. She called in sick to the diner, something she never did, and spent the morning researching, not Geode this time, but mining law, property rights, commercial extraction regulations. The information was dense, contradictory, and required expertise she didn't possess. What became clear quickly was that owning land with valuable minerals beneath it didn't automatically grant her the right to extract them. Nevada had complex regulations about mining operations, environmental assessments, permits that took months or years to obtain. More troubling was what she learned about ownership disputes. If someone could prove they had prior claim to mineral rights, or if the property had been transferred fraudulently, her $1 purchase could be challenged in court. The legal fees alone would be devastating. She would need lawyers, geologists, mining consultants, people who expected payment up front, not promises of future wealth. The gap between discovery and realization felt impossibly wide. Michelle called that afternoon. Sarah had been avoiding her, knowing the conversation would be difficult. "How was your trip to the desert?" Michelle asked, her tone carrying the satisfaction of someone expecting confirmation of their warnings. Sarah hesitated, then told her the truth about the cave, the crystals, Tom Harrison's estimates. The silence that followed lasted long enough that Sarah thought the connection had dropped. "You're delusional," Michelle said finally. "You went down into some abandoned cave, and now you think you're sitting on millions. Sarah, listen to yourself. you sound like every desperate person who ever bought a lottery ticket and started spending the money before the numbers came up. It's not real. It's a fantasy you created because you can't accept that you made a terrible decision. Sarah tried to explain. She told Michelle about Tom, about the maps, about the formations she had seen with her own eyes. Michelle's voice grew sharper with each detail. So, an old man told you stories, and you believed them because you wanted to. Did it occur to you that he might be exaggerating, that decades of disappointment might have twisted his memories? Even if there are crystals down there, even if they're as amazing as he claims, do you have any idea what it would cost to extract them legally? Millions, Sarah. You'd need millions just to start. The conversation ended badly with Michelle saying she couldn't watch Sarah destroy herself chasing fantasies. Sarah sat in the apartment afterward, staring at the maps and wondering if her sister was right. Maybe she had seen what she wanted to see. Maybe Tom's estimates were inflated by nostalgia and regret. Maybe the whole thing was exactly what it appeared to be from the outside, a collapsed cave in the desert, worthless, except to someone too desperate to see clearly. Work the next day was difficult. Her body was exhausted from the drive. Her mind scattered across problems she couldn't solve. The diner manager noticed and asked if everything was okay. Sarah said yes, knowing she couldn't explain that she had spent the weekend discovering potential wealth she couldn't access while still owing money for meals she couldn't afford. The disconnect was too large, too absurd. She served coffee, cleaned tables, collected tips that wouldn't cover her electric bill, and tried not to think about crystals worth millions sitting beneath land no one else wanted. Emma asked about the cave that evening. When can we go back? Sarah didn't have an answer. She wanted to say soon, wanted to promise they would return and claim what was theirs. But the obstacles were stacking up faster than solutions. She needed money to hire experts. She needed experts to confirm value. She needed confirmed value to attract investors. And she needed investors to afford the legal and operational costs of mining. Each step required capital she didn't have and credibility she couldn't establish. The following weeks passed in a haze of routine punctuated by research. Sarah spent every free moment learning about mineral extraction, property law, and the economics of gemstone markets. She contacted 3 geologists willing to provide assessments, but their fees ranged from $5 to $15,000. Money she didn't have for services that might confirm the property was worthless. After all, she was trapped in a loop where proving value required resources only value could provide. The tax bill arrived again, this time with additional penalties for missed payment deadlines. The amount had grown to $14,000. The letter was more direct now, stating that foreclosure proceedings would begin in 60 days if payment wasn't received. Sarah read it 3 times, then filed it with the other documents she couldn't afford to address. Losing the property would solve one problem and create another. She would no longer owe taxes she couldn't pay, but she would also lose the only asset she had ever owned. Her co-worker at the grocery store, the one who had warned her about buying foreclosed land, noticed Sarah's distraction. "You still thinking about that property?" Sarah nodded. The co-worker shook her head. "You need to let it go. I've seen this before." People convince themselves they found something valuable, spend money they don't have trying to prove it, and end up worse off than they started. Cut your losses, walk away while you still can. The advice was sound. Sarah knew it intellectually, but knowing and accepting were different things. She had stood in that crystal gallery, had seen formations that defied easy description, had held Tom Harrison's maps, and heard his conviction that the collapse had been staged. Walking away meant accepting that the extraordinary was just another illusion, that hope was just another liability she couldn't afford. She tried a different approach. Instead of hiring experts, she would document the cave herself, photograph the formations, measure the chambers, create evidence that could support her claims without requiring upfront payments. It was risky, possibly dangerous, but it was something she could do now, rather than waiting for resources that might never come. She began planning a second trip. This time, with better equipment and more time to explore the deeper sections, Tom's maps indicated the problem was Emma. Taking her daughter back into a potentially unstable cave system felt irresponsible, but leaving her behind meant finding childcare Sarah couldn't afford and didn't trust. Michelle was out of the question. Her few friends were already stretched too thin managing their own survival. Emma would have to come, which meant Sarah would have to be more careful than ever, taking no risks that could leave her daughter alone in the deserts. The decision was made easier by circumstance. Sarah's landlord delivered an eviction notice in person, standing in the doorway with an expression that mixed apology and indifference. 2 months behind on rent, he said. I've been patient, but I can't carry you any longer. You have 30 days to pay or vacate. Sarah thanked him quietly and closed the door. She looked around the apartment at the life she had built from nothing and maintained through sheer will, and understood that it was ending regardless of what she decided. Staying meant finding money she didn't have for rent she couldn't afford on an apartment that barely qualified as shelter. Leaving meant having nowhere to go unless she created another option. The cave property was beginning to look less like an asset and more like the only move she had left. It wasn't a good plan. It wasn't even a safe plan, but it was a plan shaped by necessity. And necessity had been her guide for years. She told Emma they were going back to Nevada, this time to stay for a while. Emma's eyes widened. To live there? Sarah nodded. Just temporarily, she said. While I figure things out. Emma asked where they would sleep. Sarah explained. They would camp initially, then maybe build something more permanent if things worked out. Emma processed this with the quiet acceptance she had learned, asking practical questions about school and friends. Rather than objecting to the upheaval, Sarah gave notice at both jobs, cashed out what little remained in her accounts, and sold everything that had any value. Furniture, electronics, clothing beyond what they could fit in the car. The total came to $800, enough for supplies and gas with almost nothing left over. She packed the car methodically, every item chosen for utility rather than sentiment, food, water, camping gear, tools, the maps, and documents related to the property. They left the apartment on a Friday morning, Emma looking back once before facing forward again. The drive felt different this time, not exploratory but final. Sarah was not going to Nevada to visit her property. She was going to claim it, to occupy it, to force circumstance into something that resembled opportunity. It was reckless, possibly insane, definitely the kind of decision people would cite as evidence of her instability, but it was also the only direction she could see that didn't lead directly backward into the same failures. They arrived at the property in late afternoon, the sun already beginning its descent toward the horizon. Sarah parked near the collapsed main entrance and sat for a moment, letting the enormity of the decision settle. This was home now. This stretch of desert, this sealed cave, this problem she had bought for $6 and couldn't solve. Emma climbed out and stood looking at the land, her expression unreadable. Sarah set up camp away from the cave entrance, choosing a spot with some natural windbreak from the rock formations. The tent was small but adequate. She arranged their supplies carefully, creating zones for food, water, equipment. Everything needed to be organized because chaos out here could mean danger. Emma helped without being asked, moving with the efficiency of someone who understood that survival required cooperation. That night, they ate canned soup, heated over a camping stove, and watched the stars emerge with a clarity impossible in the city. Emma asked if they were going to be okay. Sarah pulled her close. I don't know, she admitted, but we're going to try very hard. Emma nodded against her shoulder. The honesty felt important. She wouldn't lie to her daughter about the precariousness of their situation. Emma deserved to understand what they were attempting, even if she couldn't fully grasp the stakes. Morning brought heat, and the realization that living on the property was vastly different from visiting it. Sarah's first priority was securing water. They had brought supplies, but not enough to last more than a week. She drove into town and filled every container she had at the gas station, paying from their dwindling cash. The man behind the counter recognized her. Back again? Sarah nodded. We're staying for a while. His expression suggested he thought she was making a mistake, but had too much courtesy to say so. Back at the property, Sarah began preparing for descent into the cave. She had purchased better rope, more flashlights, climbing equipment she barely knew how to use. The ventilation shaft was still the only accessible entry point, and it remained narrow enough that each descent felt like threading a needle. She practiced several times without going deep, familiarizing herself with the handholds, the angle, the points where the passage tightened. Emma watched from above, her anxiety visible but contained. Sarah had made her promise to stay near the car, to have the keys ready, to know exactly what to do if something went wrong. It was inadequate preparation for the responsibilities Sarah was placing on her 7-year-old daughter, but inadequate was all they had. Every choice now existed in the space between necessary and impossible. On the third morning, Sarah descended with camera equipment and measuring tools. The shaft felt narrower each time, as though the rock itself was reconsidering whether to allow passage. She emerged into the crystal gallery, and the sight remained overwhelming despite familiarity. The geodess caught her flashlight beam and scattered it in fragments of purple, white, and gold. She spent an hour photographing from every angle, trying to capture scale and clarity in images that would convince skeptics. The locked gate blocking the deeper chambers remained frustratingly intact. Sarah examined it more carefully this time, noting that the chain was old, but the lock itself was newer, perhaps replaced within the last decade. Someone had been down here more recently than the tourist closure suggested. She tried various methods of opening it, finally resorting to bolt cutters she had brought specifically for this purpose. The chain resisted, then gave way with a sound that echoed through the chamber. Beyond the gate, the passage descended steeply. Sarah moved carefully, testing each step before committing her weight. The walls here were rougher, less finished than the tourist sections. This was the area Tom had mentioned, the expanded route they were developing when the collapse occurred. Her flashlight revealed formations that grew larger as she descended. Geodes, the size of barrels, then cars. Their exteriors unremarkable until light penetrated their split surfaces to reveal interiors lined with crystals of extraordinary clarity. She reached the chamber that matched Tom's description of the cathedral room. The ceiling arched 30 feet above her, natural stone carved by water and time into shapes that resembled vaulted architecture. But it was the walls that commanded attention. They were lined with formations unlike anything she had seen in the upper gallery. These geodes contained not just crystals, but visible threads of metal, gold, copper, silver, trapped within the crystal matrix as it formed millions of years earlier. Sarah approached the largest formation slowly, aware that her hands were shaking. The geode was 8 feet tall, split open to reveal an interior that looked like someone had poured liquid gold through glass and frozen it in place. The crystal was clear as water, shot through with veins of metal that caught her light and reflected it in patterns that seemed to move. She had seen Tom's small specimen. This was the same phenomenon at a scale that defied comprehension. She took photographs until her camera's memory was full, then took more with her phone. She measured, documented, noted locations with reference to Tom's maps. The chamber extended beyond what her light could reach, suggesting more formations deeper still. Hours passed without her noticing. When she finally checked her phone, 4 hours had elapsed since she descended. Emma would be terrified. She climbed back quickly, emerging into sunlight that felt aggressive after so long in darkness. Emma ran over, anger and relief competing on her face. "You said an hour, you promised." Sarah apologized, pulling her close. "I lost track of time." "I'm sorry, but Emma, what's down there?" "It's real. Everything Tom said is real." Emma's anger faded into curiosity. "Can I see?" Sarah hesitated. The descent was dangerous. The passages narrow, the risks numerous. But Emma had been patient, had trusted her through decisions that made no rational sense. And if this was going to be their future, Emma deserved to understand what they were fighting for. "Tomorrow," Sarah said, "I'll take you down tomorrow, and you can see for yourself." That evening, Sarah reviewed the photographs on her laptop, powered by a solar charger she had brought. The images were clear, undeniable, extraordinary, but they were also just images. Without expert verification, without geological assessment, without laboratory analysis of the crystal composition and metal content, they proved nothing except that she had taken pictures of rocks. The gap between documentation and legitimacy remained vast. She tried calling several mining companies, pitching the property site unseen, offering partnerships that would give them majority stake in exchange for development capital. None were interested. "We get these calls constantly," one executive told her. "Someone buys cheap land, finds some rocks, thinks they've struck it rich. 99% of the time, it's nothing. We don't have resources to chase every amateur claim." Sarah asked what it would take to get them interested. "Verifiable geological assessments from a licensed firm." He said core samples analyzed by independent laboratories, historical documentation of commercial-grade mineral deposits, and even then we'd need to assess structural stability, environmental impact, extraction costs. "It's a long process and we only pursue it when preliminary data justifies the investment." She thanked him and ended the call. The preliminary data required thousands of dollars she didn't have. The phone rang before she could set it down. The county tax assessor's office. She almost didn't answer. Already knowing what they would say, the woman's voice was familiar, tired, but not unkind. "Miss Chen, we need to discuss your tax situation. The 90-day deadline is approaching, and we haven't received payments or heard from you about a hardship extension." Sarah explained she was working on securing funding but needed more time. The woman sighed, I understand, but the process doesn't stop just because you need more time. If payment isn't received by the deadline, foreclosure proceedings will begin automatically. The property will be auctioned again and any debts attached to it will be written off. You'll lose ownership, but you'll also be released from the tax liability. Part of Sarah wanted to accept that outcome, to let the property go, to walk away from this impossible situation, to return to the familiar struggle of poverty. That at least made sense. But she thought about the cathedral room, about formations that had waited millions of years to be found, about Emma watching her mother choose between giving up and trying something that might fail spectacularly, about the fact that walking away now would mean all of this, the money spent, the jobs lost, the apartment abandoned, would have been for nothing. She told the woman she would find a way to pay. The woman wished her luck, her tone suggesting she had heard similar promises before and watched them all fail. Sarah ended the call and sat in the tent, listening to Emma's breathing as she slept. The money wasn't coming from mining companies or investors. They were all waiting for proof she couldn't provide without money she didn't have. If she was going to save the property, she would have to do it differently. The next morning, Sarah drove into town with a new plan. She would sell access to the cave not for mining, but for viewing. If the formations were as extraordinary as she believed, people would pay to see them. Not millions, but enough to cover immediate expenses. And by time, she stopped at the local newspaper office, a small operation that served the surrounding county. The editor was younger than she expected, a woman in her 30s who looked skeptical when Sarah explained what she wanted. You're trying to reopen the Geode caverns. Sarah nodded. Not officially, not as a tourist operation, but I'd like to invite people to see what's there. The editor leaned back. That cave has been closed for 40 years. Everyone knows the story. It collapsed, someone got hurt, and it's been sealed ever since. What makes you think you can just waltz in and start giving tours? Sarah showed her the photographs. The editor's expression shifted as she scrolled through them, skepticism giving way to surprise. These are from down there from the sealed sections. Sarah confirmed it. The editor studied the images more carefully. If these are real, if that's actually what's underneath that property, this is significant. Not just locally, geologically. She looked up, but you understand the liability, right? If something happens to someone while they're down there, you'd be responsible. Sarah understood. She also understood. She had no other options. The editor made a proposal. Let me send someone down there, a photographer, someone who can document this properly. If what you're showing me is accurate, we'll run a story that'll bring attention. And attention might bring the kind of people who can actually help you develop it. But if you're exaggerating, if these photos are from somewhere else, I need to know before we publish anything. Sarah agreed immediately. The editor made calls, and by afternoon, a photographer and a retired geologist arrived at the property. The geologist, Dr. Marcus Webb, was in his 70s, his face weathered, but his eyes sharp with the intensity of someone whose passion had never dimmed. He studied Sarah's photos with an expression she couldn't read, then asked to see the formations himself. The descent was more complicated with 3 people, but they managed. Dr. Webb moved slowly, his age evident in careful movements, but his focus absolute. When they reached the crystal gallery, he stood silent for several minutes, simply looking. Then he moved to the nearest formation, examining it with a practiced eye that missed nothing. My God, he said quietly, I thought these were lost. He spent 2 hours in the gallery, then insisted on seeing the deeper chambers. In the cathedral room, he examined the gold-threaded crystals with something approaching reverence. He took samples with Sarah's permission, carefully extracting small pieces that wouldn't damage the larger formations. The photographer captured everything, his camera clicking constantly as he documented scale, clarity, and the extraordinary interplay of crystal and metal. When they finally ascended, Dr. Webb sat on the ground near the entrance, breathing hard but radiating excitement. In 50 years of geological work, he said, I've never seen anything like this. The formations are exceptional, but the metallic inclusions are unprecedented at this scale. If these samples confirm what I suspect, this site represents one of the most significant geological discoveries of the century. The photographer reviewed his images, nodding. These are going to cause a stir. Dr. Webb looked at Sarah. You're sitting on something extraordinary, but you need to understand what that means. Once word gets out, you'll have attention from universities, mining companies, collectors, tourists. Some of that attention will be helpful, some won't be. You need legal protection, expert guidance, and resources to manage what's coming. Sarah asked how long it would take to verify the samples. Dr. Webb said he could have preliminary results in a week, full analysis in a month. The newspaper would run the story once the preliminary results confirmed the formations were genuine. After that, Sarah's quiet discovery would become very public very quickly. The editor asked if Sarah was ready for that. Sarah looked at Emma, who stood nearby watching everything with wide eyes. "No," Sarah admitted, "but I don't think I have a choice." The article ran 5 days later after Dr. Webb's preliminary analysis confirmed that the crystals contained unprecedented concentrations of native gold and silver in a matrix so clear and stable it defied conventional formation theory. The headline read, "Long-lost geode caverns revealed geological wonder." The photographs were stunning, the descriptions carefully worded but impossible to downplay. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the next morning, Sarah's phone had 17 voicemails from people claiming to be investors, mining consultants, documentary filmmakers, and university researchers. News stations from Las Vegas and Salt Lake City called requesting interviews. A lawyer from Reno left a message offering to represent her in negotiations with potential development partners. The quiet property in the desert was suddenly the center of attention Sarah had never wanted and didn't know how to manage. Dr. Webb called that afternoon. "I hope you're prepared." He said the analysis results are going to be published in next month's geological journal. The academic community is already discussing the implications. You're about to have more interest than you can handle. He paused. "I'd like to help if you'll let me. Not for profit, just because this discovery deserves proper stewardship." Sarah accepted immediately, understanding that she was drowning and he was offering a lifeline. But attention came with complications she hadn't anticipated. 3 men showed up at the property that evening claiming to represent a mining company interested in making an offer. They were aggressive, insistent, demanding immediate access to the cave to verify the claims. Sarah refused, and they didn't leave quietly. One implied that her ownership might be challenged, that there were legal questions about whether the county had the right to sell property with undisclosed mineral value for $1. After they left, Sarah sat in the tent, feeling the walls closing in. The discovery that was supposed to solve everything was creating new problems faster than she could address them. Emma asked if those men were going to take the cave. Sarah said no, but the certainty she tried to project felt hollow. She didn't know enough about mining law or property rights to be sure of anything, except that people with resources and expertise were already circling. The county called the next morning. The tax assessor's voice was different now, formal rather than sympathetic. "We need to discuss your property. There have been inquiries about the mineral rights, and we need to verify that the sale to you was properly executed." Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What does that mean? The assessor said there would be a review, that the transfer would be examined to ensure it met legal requirements, that Sarah should expect delays in having the title fully cleared. She called a lawyer who had left a message, a man named David Chen, who specialized in mining law. He listened to her situation and delivered news that was both good and devastating. The sale was valid. He said, "The county had the right to transfer the property and you completed the purchase legally, but the delinquent taxes create a complication. If you can't pay them, the county can still foreclose despite the recent discovery. In fact, they're more likely to pursue it now that the property has demonstrated value." Sarah asked what her options were. "You need to pay the taxes immediately," David said. "Once that's done, your ownership is secure. If you can't pay, you need to find someone who will. But be very careful about the terms. A lot of people are going to approach you, offering to cover the taxes in exchange for ownership stakes. Many of those offers will be designed to separate you from the property while making it look like you're being helped." The reality crystallized with brutal clarity. She had $14,000 in taxes due in 3 weeks. She had less than $200 remaining. The property was worth potentially hundreds of millions, but she couldn't access that value fast enough to prevent losing it. She was watching a fortune slip through her fingers while simultaneously drowning in attention from people who wanted to take it from her. That night, lying in the tent with Emma asleep beside her, Sarah felt the full weight of impossible pressing down. She had made it this far through pure determination. But determination didn't pay taxes. She had discovered something extraordinary. But discovery without resources was just knowledge of what she was about to lose. The cave waited below, silent and patient, filled with wonders that had existed for millions of years, but human timelines were measured differently. She had 3 weeks, 21 days to find $14,000 or watch everything collapse, not from structural failure, but from her inability to pay for what she had found. The next morning would bring new calls, new offers, new complications. But tonight, In the darkness of the Nevada desert, Sarah Chen understood with perfect clarity that the hardest part wasn't finding the treasure, it was keeping it. The morning arrived with unexpected visitors. Sarah woke to the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines cutting through the desert silence. She emerged from the tent to find 3 SUVs parked near her campsite and a group of people standing at a respectful distance waiting for her to acknowledge them. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, extending her hand. "Dr. Rebecca Fontaine," she said. "Stanford University. I came as soon as I read the article." Sarah shook her hand, still disoriented by sleep and the sudden intrusion. Dr. Fontaine gestured to the others. "My team, geologists, minologists, a structural engineer, we'd like permission to study the formation, not to extract anything, just to document and analyze." Sarah asked what was in it for her. Dr. Fontaine smiled. "Legitimacy. Academic verification that will make it impossible for anyone to claim this discovery is exaggerated or fabricated. And potentially assistance with your immediate problems." Sarah invited them to sit. Emma watched from the tent entrance, curious but cautious. "Dr. Fontaine explained that Stanford had discretionary funding for geological research. They could commission a full structural assessment of the cave, provide expert testimony about its value and significance, and most importantly, they could arrange for immediate purchase of mineral rights to specific sections in exchange for academic access. The amount they could offer was $50,000. It wasn't millions. It wasn't even close to the formation's true value, but it was enough to pay the taxes, secure her ownership, and buy time to negotiate better terms with commercial interests. Sarah felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she was holding. She asked what the terms would be. Dr. Fontaine outlined them clearly. Stanford would have exclusive academic access to study the formations for 5 years. They would own mineral rights to samples extracted for research purposes only. Sarah would retain full ownership of the property and all commercial rights to any mining or tourist operations. Sarah wanted to say yes immediately, but David Chen's warning echoed in her mind. She told Dr. Fontaine she needed to review any agreements with her lawyer first. Dr. Fontaine approved. "That's wise. In fact, we'd prefer you have legal representation. This needs to be done properly." She handed Sarah a folder containing the proposed contract. "Take your time. We're staying in town for the week. Once you're ready, we'll proceed." After they left, Sarah called David Chen. He reviewed the contract over the phone, asking detailed questions about specific clauses. After an hour, he delivered his assessment. "This is legitimate," he said. "Actually, it's better than legitimate, it's generous. Stanford could have offered half this amount and you'd probably have taken it. They're giving you fair value for research access while protecting your commercial interests. I'd recommend accepting." Sarah asked him to handle the negotiation and paperwork. David said he would, but noted that his fees would be substantial once the property started generating real income. For now, he'd work on contingency, taking payment only when she could afford it. The gesture felt significant. People were starting to believe her story, starting to invest in her success, rather than betting on her failure. She called Dr. Fontaine that afternoon and accepted the terms. The formal agreement would take a few days to finalize, but Dr. Fontaine authorized an immediate advance of $20,000 against the final payment. The money appeared in Sarah's account the next morning. The first time in her life she had seen 5 figures attached to a name. She sat staring at the screen, unable to fully process that the numbers were real. The first call she made was to the county tax assessor. She arranged immediate payment of the full delinquent amount, $14,000 plus accumulated penalties. The total came to $14,700. The remaining $5,300 was more money than Sarah had possessed at any point in her adult life. The tax assessor processed the payment and confirmed her ownership was now clear. No liens, no encumbrances, no pending foreclosures. The property was unequivocally hers. The second call was harder. She dialed Michelle's number, waiting through several rings before her sister answered. Michelle's voice was cool, distant. "Sarah, I really don't have time for another update about your desert adventure," Sarah interrupted her. "The Stanford Geology Department just paid me $50,000 for research access to the cave." The silence that followed was different from their previous conversations. It wasn't dismissive or pitying, it was shock. Michelle asked her to repeat that. Sarah did, adding the details about the tax payment, the clear title, the academic verification of the formation's significance. Michelle was quiet for a long moment. "So, you were right," she said finally. Her voice carried something Sarah had rarely heard from her sister. Respect. I thought you were making a terrible mistake. I was sure this would end badly. Sarah said she understood why Michelle had thought that. Most rational people would have reached the same conclusion. But you didn't listen to rational people, Michelle continued. You went down into a sealed cave based on nothing but hope and some old man stories, and you found something extraordinary. Sarah said it wasn't quite that simple, but Michelle interrupted. No, it was exactly that simple. You took a risk I would never have taken, and it paid off. I'm sorry I didn't support you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were being foolish. The apology caught Sarah off guard. She had expected Michelle to downplay the significance or find reasons to maintain her skepticism. Instead, her sister was acknowledging that Sarah had seen something she had missed. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, the longest they had spoken without argument in years. Michelle asked questions about the formations, about Emma, about what Sarah planned to do next. The defensiveness that usually characterized their relationship was absent, replaced by genuine curiosity. Before hanging up, Michelle said something that stayed with Sarah. You know what's amazing? Not just that you found this cave, but that you bought it in the first place. You were so broke you couldn't pay rent, and you spent your last $6 on a piece of desert. That's either crazy or brilliant, and I'm realizing now it might have been both. Sarah thanked her and ended the call, feeling a shift in their relationship that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with recognition. Dr. Fontaine's team arrived 2 days later with equipment that transformed the property into a research site. They established a base camp, installed proper safety equipment in the ventilation shaft, and began systematic documentation of the cave system. Sarah watched them work, fascinated by the precision and care they brought to examining formations she had first encountered alone in the dark. Dr. Webb joined them, his preliminary samples having generated significant interest in the geological community. He pulled Sarah aside one afternoon and showed her the laboratory results. The crystals contained native gold at concentrations unprecedented in natural formations. More significantly, the crystal structure itself was unique, exhibiting properties that had theoretical applications in optics and electronics. This isn't just valuable as gemstones, he explained. This is scientifically important. You're not just sitting on a mineral deposit, you're sitting on a natural laboratory that could advance several fields of study. The implications were staggering. Sarah had thought in terms of mining and selling crystals. Dr. Webb was describing something more complex and potentially more valuable. Universities, research institutions, technology companies, they would all want access. The property wasn't just an asset, it was a resource with applications she couldn't fully understand. Dr. Webb suggested she would need advisors beyond legal representation, scientists who could help her navigate the intersection of geological discovery and commercial application. As the Stanford team worked, other interests continued to circle. Mining companies sent representatives with offers that ranged from reasonable to predatory. One proposed buying the property outright for $2 million, a sum that would have seemed inconceivable weeks earlier, but now felt insultingly low given what she knew lay beneath. Another offered a partnership where they would fund all extraction operations in exchange for 80% of revenues, leaving Sarah with a minority stake in her own property. David Chen advised her to reject all offers until Stanford's research was complete, and they had better data on the formation's full extent and value. The preliminary exploration had revealed only a fraction of the cave system. There were chambers beyond the cathedral room that remained unexplored, passages that led deeper into the formation. Until they understood the complete scope of what existed below ground, any agreement would be negotiated from a position of incomplete information. The journalist who had written the original article returned for a follow-up story. She interviewed Sarah at length, asking about the journey from poverty to discovery. From $3 in the bank to clear ownership of a geological wonder, Sarah found herself telling the truth in ways she usually avoided. About the eviction notice that had forced her hand, about Emma sleeping on the floor while Sarah decided whether to spend their last money on gas to drive into the desert, about standing in the Crystal Gallery for the first time and understanding that hope wasn't always foolish. The article ran under the headline, "From Broke to Breakthrough, Single Mother's Dollar Purchase Reveals $500M Secret." The number came from Dr. Webb's updated estimate based on preliminary extrapolation of the formation's extent, $500 million. Sarah read it multiple times, trying to make the figure feel real. It remained abstract, a concept rather than money, possibility rather than certainty. But the attention that followed was very real. National news outlets picked up the story. Television producers called requesting interviews. A documentary crew arrived from Los Angeles wanting to film the cave and Sarah's story of discovery. She agreed to some requests, declined others, trying to maintain control over a narrative that was rapidly spreading beyond her ability to manage it. Emma appeared in several of the articles, identified as Sarah's daughter, who had waited above ground while her mother descended into the cave. One journalist asked Emma what it felt like knowing her mother had discovered something so valuable. Emma thought carefully before answering. "It feels like we're going to be okay now." The simplicity of the statement captured something Sarah had been trying to articulate. Not that they would be rich, though they might be, but that they would be okay, that survival was no longer the only goal. Tom Harrison called after seeing the coverage. His voice was thick with emotion. "You did it," he said. "You brought that place back. I spent 40 years wondering if anyone would ever see what was down there again. Thank you for proving I wasn't crazy." Sarah told him she couldn't have done it without his maps, without his conviction that the formations were worth fighting for. Tom said he'd like to visit the site to see the cathedral room one more time. Sarah invited him immediately, promising access whenever he wanted it. His visit came 3 weeks after Sarah had paid the taxes. He arrived with his wife, both of them moving slowly but purposefully toward the cave entrance. Sarah accompanied them down, concerned about Tom's age and the difficult descent. But once he reached the Crystal Gallery, years seemed to fall away. He moved through the space with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours there, pointing out formations he remembered, noting changes in the structure. In the cathedral room, he stood before the largest gold-threaded geode and wept. His wife held his hand, her own eyes bright with tears. "I thought I'd never see this again," Tom said. "I thought it would stay buried forever and everyone would forget it existed." Sarah told him that could never happen now. Too many people knew, too much documentation existed. The cave would be preserved and studied, protected rather than sealed. Tom turned to her. "You could have sold it immediately. Could have taken the quick money and walked away. A lot of people would have." Sarah shrugged. "I didn't buy it to get rich. I bought it because I had nowhere else to go." Tom smiled. "Maybe that's why you were the one who found this. The people looking for fortune would have missed what was actually here. You were just trying to survive, and that let you see clearly." As the weeks passed, Sarah began to understand the complexity of what she had inherited. The Stanford team's research revealed 17 distinct chambers, some containing formations that dwarfed those in the cathedral room. The deepest sections extended nearly 300 feet below the surface, requiring specialized equipment to access safely. Each new discovery added to the property's value while simultaneously increasing the challenge of managing it responsibly. Environmental groups expressed concern about commercial mining operations damaging the formations. Preservation advocates argued the cave should be protected as a natural monument rather than exploited for profit. Mining interests pushed for extraction rights that would maximize revenue regardless of impact. Sarah found herself navigating competing interests that all claimed to represent the best path forward. David Chen helped her establish a formal entity, the Geode Caverns Conservation Trust, designed to balance preservation with economic development. The trust would maintain ownership of the property, oversee research access, and carefully control any commercial activities. Sarah would chair the board, but experts in geology, mining law, and conservation would guide major decisions. It wasn't perfect, but it created structure where chaos had threatened to overwhelm. The first major agreement came from a consortium of technology companies interested in the crystal formation's optical properties. They offered a 10-year licensing arrangement, paying $3 million annually for the right to extract limited samples under scientific supervision. The extraction would be minimal, barely visible against the scale of the formations, and would be conducted under protocols designed to preserve the cave's integrity. Sarah signed the agreement 4 months after buying the property for $1. The first payment arrived in the trust's account within days, $3 million. She stared at the number, then looked around the improved campsite that had become her temporary home. She could afford a house now. She could afford anything, really. But the money felt less significant than the fact that she had created something stable, something that would continue generating value long after the initial discovery faded from headlines. She called Michelle. Her sister answered immediately. "How's the millionaire?" Sarah laughed. "Weird. Everything is weird." Michelle asked what she planned to do with the money. Sarah said she was still figuring that out. But first, she wanted to establish Emma's education fund, pay off the debts that had accumulated before all this, and maybe buy a house near the property so they weren't living in a tent. Michelle offered unexpected advice. Don't just react to having money. Think about what you want your life to look like. You spent years in survival mode. Now you have choices. Make sure you're choosing rather than just spending. The wisdom in the statement surprised Sarah. Michelle had always had money, but she understood something about intentionality that poverty had never allowed Sarah to consider. Emma's 8th birthday arrived in the middle of the chaos. Sarah had almost forgotten. The date swallowed by negotiations and site visits and constant decisions, but the Stanford team remembered. They organized a small celebration at the base camp, complete with a cake someone had driven from town and candles that flickered in the desert wind. Emma blew them out while everyone sang, her face glowing with happiness that had nothing to do with the property's value and everything to do with being seen. Later, Sarah took Emma down into the crystal gallery, just the two of them. They sat on the cave floor, surrounded by formations that caught their flashlight beams and scattered light in purple fragments. Emma asked if they were really going to keep the cave. Sarah said, yes. Emma nodded, satisfied. Good, I like it here. It's ours. The simplicity of the claim made Sarah smile. Emma understood ownership not in terms of value or investments, but as belonging. The cave was theirs, the same way the tent was theirs, the same way their old apartment had been theirs. It was the place they lived, the thing they protected, the space they occupied in a world that had rarely made room for them. News of the technology licensing deal brought renewed interest from media outlets. Sarah gave fewer interviews now, selective about which stories she participated in, but one request came from a business magazine profiling women who had succeeded against improbable odds. Sarah agreed, partly because the journalist was respectful, partly because she wanted Emma to have a record of this time that wasn't filtered through other people's assumptions. The interview covered expected ground. How did you find the cave? What made you buy the property? What advice would you give others? But the journalist asked one question that caught Sarah unprepared. Do you think you would have discovered this if you hadn't been desperate? Sarah thought carefully before answering. Probably not. People with options rarely choose uncertain paths. I bought this property because I couldn't afford to keep playing it safe. Desperation forced me to take a risk that turned out not to be a risk at all, but an opportunity I was finally desperate enough to see. The article ran with the headline, "The Desperation Advantage: How Having Nothing Led One Woman to Everything." Michelle called after reading it. That headline makes it sound like poverty is good for people. Sarah agreed it was poorly framed, but said the underlying point was valid. Comfort breeds caution. She never would have descended into an abandoned cave if she'd had a stable apartment and regular income. Sometimes you need to lose everything before you can find anything. The property's transformation accelerated through summer. A proper access tunnel was excavated alongside the ventilation shaft, equipped with lighting, safety rails, and environmental controls. A visitor center was planned for the following year, designed to allow controlled public access while protecting the formations. Sarah hired staff, mostly people from the surrounding area who needed work and possessed the kind of practical competence that formal education couldn't teach. Tom Harrison became the unofficial historian, giving talks to visiting researchers about the cave's early days and the circumstances of its closure. His presence lent credibility and continuity, connecting the property's forgotten past to its rediscovered presence. He told Sarah once that this was the best ending he could have imagined. Not just that the cave was open again, but that it was in hands of someone who understood what it meant to be forgotten. Financial advisors approached Sarah with investment strategies designed to preserve and grow her sudden wealth. She chose carefully, aware that money could disappear as quickly as it appeared if managed poorly. The trust structure helped separating operating income from long-term assets, ensuring that even if commercial ventures failed, the property itself remained protected. A year after buying the property, Sarah purchased a house 5 miles from the cave entrance. It was modest by wealthy standards, comfortable by any reasonable measure. 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, space for Emma to have her own room for the first time in her life. They moved in on a Saturday, carrying boxes that contained everything they owned, which still wasn't much despite the change in circumstances. Emma explored the house with barely contained excitement, claiming the bedroom that faced east toward the mountains. Sarah stood in the kitchen looking out the window at the desert landscape that had become familiar. This was home now, not temporary, not contingent, not balanced on the edge of eviction. Home in a way that felt permanent enough to trust. The first dinner in the new house was simple. Pasta again, a callback to the meals they'd eaten in the old apartment when money was impossibly tight. Emma noticed. Why are we eating this? We can afford real food now. Sarah smiled. This is real food, and I wanted to remember where we came from. Emma considered that, then nodded. So, we don't forget how bad it was. Sarah corrected her gently. So, we don't forget how strong we were. Michelle visited for the first time 2 months after they moved in. She flew from her suburban home, rented a car, and drove into terrain she had dismissed as worthless desert when Sarah first mentioned the property. Standing at the cave entrance, looking at the professional operation that had emerged from what she'd called a fantasy, Michelle was unusually quiet. Sarah gave her a tour of the crystal gallery and the cathedral room. Michelle moved through the space with obvious wonder, touching formations gently, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite engagement. When they emerged back into daylight, Michelle sat on a boulder and looked at her sister. "I owe you an apology." Sarah started to dismiss it, but Michelle held up her hand. "No, let me say this. I didn't just doubt your decision, I doubted you. I thought you were desperate and irrational, making choices that would destroy what little stability you had. I was wrong about all of it." Sarah sat beside her. "You weren't entirely wrong. I was desperate, and my choices could have destroyed everything." Michelle shook her head, but they didn't. "And the difference between us is that you were willing to risk everything because you understood you had nothing to lose. I couldn't see that because I've never had nothing. I've been so focused on protecting what I have that I forgot how to imagine anything different." The conversation continued for hours, ranging beyond the cave to their childhood, their different paths, the assumptions they'd made about each other. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Years of distance couldn't be erased in one afternoon, but it was a beginning made possible by Sarah's success, forcing Michelle to reconsider narratives she'd held without examination. The documentary about the discovery aired on a major streaming platform 9 months after the initial find. Sarah watched it with Emma in their living room, seeing their story told through archival footage, interviews, and sweeping shots of the cave's interior. The filmmakers had captured something true about the journey. Not just the discovery itself, but the desperation that preceded it. The courage required to descend into darkness without knowing what waited below. Emma appeared throughout the film, her comments about waiting above ground, while her mother explored, providing emotional weight. At one point, the interviewer asked what she remembered most about those early days. Emma thought carefully. "I remember thinking we were going to lose everything. And then I remember my mom coming up from the cave and telling me we'd found something that would change things. I didn't understand what she meant then, but I do now." The film ended with Sarah standing at the cave entrance, Emma beside her, looking out over the property as sunset painted the desert in shades of amber and gold. Sarah's voiceover reflected on the journey. "A year ago, I couldn't afford rent. I bought this property because I was out of options and it cost $1. I didn't know what I was buying, I just knew I needed something to change. And standing here now, I understand that sometimes you have to be willing to lose what little you have in order to find what you never imagined was possible." The documentary generated renewed interest in the property and in Sarah's story. Speaking invitations arrived from universities, business conferences, organizations focused on economic opportunity. She accepted some using the platform to talk about poverty not as moral failure but as structural trap, about risk not as recklessness but as necessity when safety offers no path forward. At one conference, a young woman approached Sarah afterward. She was crying quietly. "I'm 2 months behind on rent." She said, "I have 3 kids and I'm working 2 jobs and I can't keep up. Your story made me feel like maybe I'm not just failing. Maybe the system I'm trapped in is designed to make people like us fail." Sarah took her hands. "You're not failing, you're surviving. And surviving takes more strength than people who've never been there can understand." She gave the woman her contact information, offered to help however she could. Later, David Chen advised against making such offers without limits. "You can't save everyone." He said, "Your resources are substantial now, but not infinite." Sarah understood the practical wisdom, but also understood something he didn't. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look past her rather than at her. Even if she couldn't solve everyone's problems, she could see them. And sometimes being seen was enough to make continuing possible. The second anniversary of the purchase arrived with little fanfare. Sarah marked it privately, standing at the cave entrance early in the morning before the research team arrived. 2 years since she had paid $6 for a problem she couldn't solve. 2 years since Michelle had told her she was making a terrible mistake. 2 years since she had nothing except a daughter and a decision that looked like desperation but turned out to be something else entirely. The property's value was now estimated at over $600 million, though Sarah had no intention of selling. The technology licensing agreements generated steady income. A carefully managed tourism operation would launch next year, designed to share the cave's beauty while protecting its integrity. The trust structure ensured that wealth would flow not just to Sarah but to the community, to conservation efforts, to research that might unlock applications no one had yet imagined. But standing there in the cool morning air, Sarah didn't think about money. She thought about the person she had been 2 years earlier, serving coffee to people who never learned her name, calculating which bills could be ignored longest, lying to her daughter about whether they would be okay. That person had made a choice that looked foolish to everyone, including herself sometimes. And that choice had led here to ownership, to stability, to a future that didn't have to be measured in days. She thought about all the people still trapped in the circumstances she had escaped, not through merit or wisdom, but through a combination of desperation and chance that felt uncomfortably close to luck. The difference between her and them wasn't effort or intelligence. It was opportunity that manifested as a random email about a property no one wanted. Emma joined her at the entrance, sleepy, but drawn by the significance of the date. They stood together, watching the sun rise over the desert, painting the rock formations in colors that shifted moment by moment. "Do you ever miss the old apartment?" Emma asked. Sarah considered the question honestly. "No, but I miss who we were when we had to be strong just to survive. We're different people now." Emma leaned against her. "Are we better?" Sarah thought about that. "We're safer. We have choices we didn't have before. But better is complicated. We lost something when we stopped needing to fight every day." Emma nodded, understanding in the way children do when adults speak truth without simplification. The sun climbed higher, and eventually the research team's vehicles appeared in the distance, marking the start of another day. Sarah turned away from the cave entrance and walked with Emma back toward the house. The journey wasn't over. There would be more negotiations, more challenges, more people trying to take what she had found or diminish what she had accomplished. But those were problems of success rather than survival. And after years of the latter, the former felt almost refreshing. That evening, she sat down and wrote a letter to her former landlord, the one who had evicted her 2 years earlier. She didn't send it with anger or vindication, but with gratitude. "Your eviction notice forced me to make a decision I never would have made otherwise. I thought I was losing my home. It turned out I was losing a place that was preventing me from finding where I actually belonged. Thank you for not being patient. Thank you for forcing the issue. Without that pressure, I would still be surviving rather than living." She read it over once, then deleted it. Some acknowledgements didn't need to be sent, they only needed to be recognized. The phone rang. A producer from a major network wanted to discuss a series based on her story. A museum in New York wanted to borrow crystal samples for an exhibition on geological wonders. A foundation focused on economic mobility wanted her to join their advisory board. Sarah took notes, promised to consider each request, and ended the calls, feeling the weight of attention that came with visibility. But later, after Emma was asleep and the desert night pressed against the windows, Sarah sat alone with the maps Tom Harrison had given her. The hand-drawn lines showing chambers and passages, some explored, some still waiting. She traced them with her finger, thinking about the geologist who had created them, about his conviction that what lay beneath the desert mattered enough to document. She thought about the email that had started everything, the offer that looked like a burden rather than opportunity. She thought about the moment she had decided to descend into darkness, not knowing what she would find, but understanding she had run out of alternatives. And she thought about Emma, who had trusted her through decisions that made no rational sense, who had waited above ground while her mother disappeared into a sealed cave, who had never once asked if they should give up. The cave had changed everything. But the cave had always been there, waiting beneath the desert for millions of years. What had changed was Sarah's willingness to look, to descend, to risk the little she had in pursuit of something she couldn't see. The treasure wasn't in the cave. The treasure was in the choice to open the email, to spend the dollar, to keep going when everything suggested stopping. That was what she would tell Emma someday when her daughter was old enough to understand. The crystals were valuable. Yes, the formations were extraordinary. But the real discovery was learning that sometimes the difference between poverty and possibility was just a willingness to say yes to one more improbable door. Sarah closed the maps and turned off the light, letting the desert darkness settle around her. Tomorrow would bring more opportunities, more choices, more chances to build on what she had found. But tonight, she allowed herself to simply rest in the certainty that she had done it against odds that no rational person would have attempted. She had taken a collapsed cave, bought for $1, and transformed it into a foundation that would support her family for generations. The journey from broke to wealthy was remarkable. But the journey from invisible to seen was what mattered most. And that journey, Sarah understood, had nothing to do with money and everything to do with refusing to accept that her circumstances defined her possibilities. The cave had given her wealth, but she had given herself permission to look for it, and that permission, once claimed, could never be taken away. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already.